I saw something that I can't explain back in May of 2015. I was right around the Land Between the Lakes National Forest when I saw some sort of upright, biped walking wolfman. Whatever this thing that I saw looked exactly like something you would expect to see out of a horror movie. I mean, it was evil in the flesh, looking exactly like half man, half wolf, or dare I say, werewolf. Although I don't believe in the werewolf phenomenon. You know, people turning into a werewolf at the sight of a full moon. But I do believe in things that go bump in the night. It's also coincidental that in this area alone, there are tons of reports about a dog-like creature, as well as Bigfoot. Even though I don't believe I've seen either, but I believe this sighting that I've had, I do believe that I've seen this dog creature, whatever it's called. I think it goes by the name of Dogman, if I'm not mistaken. Whatever this creature was covered in thick, matted black hair, and had the head that perfectly resembled that of a very large wolf. One thing I noticed that seemed odd was just how large the head was. Like it didn't match the body size at all. It was so overly large. Like, had this thing not had its balance properly, its head would have caused it to tilt over and fall. That's just how big this thing was. It towered over my car, easily 8 feet I'd say. I mean it. This thing was huge. I was driving, probably somewhere around midnight. I can't exactly be sure on the time, but this thing runs right out of the road, onto the road, and looks right at me in the car. Then, it ran right back into the forest. I was stunned. It caused me to slam on my brakes since it ran so close to the car, from the opposite side of the road to the lane that I was in. It was just me in the car at the time, and the only weapon or anything to arm myself I had was a Swiss Army knife, which I knew wouldn't have done anything against this creature. What disturbed me the most was that I just knew deep down this wasn't some person trying to scare people or prank people in some costume. This looked too real, and nobody out here is going to be 8 feet tall, in a convincing werewolf costume, running around the woods, being able to move that fast, or have muscles that rippled through its fur. Right as soon as this creature left my sight and jumped into the woods, I was left with a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach, like I just wanted to open my car door and retch right there on the side of the road. As soon as it ran back into the woods, from the opposite side of the road that it originally appeared at, I could hear trees and branches breaking, like a bulldozer was bearing its way through the woods. Whatever this was had immense strength, and was definitely on a mission to get out of there, or to get somewhere. Even though at the time, I wasn't backpacking out into the backcountry, but I've been out to the bush multiple times, in all sorts of different situations. I've gone through some stuff, and I've seen things. For example, I nearly lost my leg when I accidentally stepped in a bear trap, but that's a story for another time. My point basically remains the same, is I've gone through some stuff, and I've never ever heard or seen anything like what I saw that night. It definitely left an impact on me, and has affected the way I treat the woods. I'm going to tell you a story back from when I was only 14 years old. This story has scared the living daylights out of me. It was so traumatic for me. It caused me to not go out for quite a long time. In fact, I even lost friends when I entered high school because of it. Most of the time, I was even too terrified to ride my bike to parties, or even to other friends' houses, because of this. That is, until I got to about 17, 18, and was able to get my license for the first time. Even then, I was tense being out by myself, but I felt safe under the illusion of a giant metal casing around me and glass. For about 5 years of my life, when I was around 9 years old to 14, I lived in a rural area in Mississippi. I didn't have much time to make a lot of friends, but I had a very small circle of very close friends. 3 of them, actually. And it was very common during the summertime for me to ride my bike to their houses. Because it was a rural area, everything was thickly wooded, with creeks, beautiful birds chirping, lots of bugs. You know how the South is if you live there. It's very humid in the summertime, but not enough to deter my 14-year-old self to go hang out with friends because, well, in 1978, when this occurred, There wasn't much to do, other than maybe read books, throw a ball, and explore, which is what I try to do with my close buddies. So, to set the stage, this was the evening in the summertime. I want to say maybe it was a Saturday. I can't exactly remember. It's possible it was a school night. All I know is that I wasn't in school at the time. So, it was probably evening from what I remember. It all started with me riding my bike to my friend's house, who was closest to me. He lived about 3.5 miles away, down a long gravel road. Now, to set the geography a little better, between me and him was thick woods. Sure, you could walk through it to get to his house, since if you did, our backyards were basically accessible from both sides of the woods. But it would take much longer, because the brush was very thick, and there was lots and lots of blackberry bramble, so good luck getting around that. 14-year-old me had no idea what was about to happen. Off to my right, somewhere on the road, I began hearing thrashing around, like a giant was thrashing and smacking trees and through brush. It sounded like a grizzly bear charging through the woods. It was enough to make me stop on my bike, turn and look. And although I heard the noise, I couldn't exactly see anything, until whatever this was bursted through the brush and the open trees, and started to chase after me. At first, I didn't know what it was. I just started screaming and pedaling as fast as I could. But as sadistic as whatever this animal was, it seemed to slow its pace as soon as it started chasing me. Like it could keep up with me easily, but it wanted to make sure to terrify me, and just to cause fear. At least that's what I got out of it. And it did. It chased me for well over a mile, before it jumped over a creek, back into a different wooded area. After turning my head a few times to look at whatever this thing was, my pursuer, I was looking at a wolf creature, which later in my life, I would draw similar comparisons to the werewolves in the movie The Howling. But in 1978, those movies hadn't come out yet. That wouldn't be for another 5 to 10 years, and I wouldn't even see those movies till I was way in my later 20s. And when I did see them, oh boy, did that give me a rush back to memory lane and send me into a panic attack. And at the time, the girl I was living with, whom I was dating, didn't quite understand until I broke down and told her. I don't think she believed me. She had thought I was just having a manic episode and wanted to know if I needed to call an ambulance. But I tried to convince her. But again, I think she was more sympathetic than she was believing. It's the main reason why I don't tell many people my story. I've reached out to a few people who consider themselves cryptozoology reporters or YouTubers to get my story out there, because I think it's important for people who have trauma like I do to try and understand that we're not crazy, that we should be believed, and that this sort of thing does happen more often than not. Yes, I know sometimes it can be hard to believe, to think a creature like this truly exists and will chase you and attack you, but that's not exactly the case of reality. Even though this creature never did attack me, I feel had I stopped my bike and it got up to me, it would have probably torn me limb from limb, or so I can only imagine. Again though, this thing for whatever reason kept about an even 10 feet behind me, just enough to give chase and incite as much fear as possible, but not enough to get to me, and again darting off into the woods after a certain point. I mean, you gotta remember, at the time, I was only a 14-year-old kid. I could only pedal so fast. It's not like I had a mountain bike or anything exciting. It was a pretty cheap, dinky bike. I mean, it was more than enough to get around, but it wasn't exciting or expensive by any stretch of the means. I had no gauges in speed, and the only really way I can go faster was to obviously pedal faster, just like you had to in the old days, and that was that. As I try and sit here and dwell back on the memories of this thing chasing me and trying to remember what it looked like, if you've never seen the movie The Howling, just take your time and Google it, and you'll see kind of what I'm talking about. This wolf creature that I saw didn't look to the T of what those creatures looked like, but very, very close. The only main difference that I can really remember was the thing that I saw was built like a tank. I mean, it was rippling muscles, huge broad shoulders, and very, very strong. Enough that it burst through the thick brush like it did, with ease, and then it seemed to slow down when it started chasing me. I truly believe that it was more than strong enough and fast enough to catch up to me if it really wanted to. But why? Why was it so set on causing me fear and anxiety and wanting to chase me? It seemed like it was getting a thrill out of it, like it was enjoying causing me to be panicked. I'll never get it, and I don't think I'll quite understand exactly what it was that I saw. I ended up getting to my friend's house in probably only half the time that it originally would take me. I was pale as a sheet, terrified, shaking like a cold kitten left out in the cold. He didn't quite understand what had happened. I even had a hard time telling him what happened, but when I did, I think he just thought that I saw a large black bear, since there are black bears in Mississippi, and he thought potentially I maybe ran into a mama black bear with cubs around. But I stressed to him that black bears don't act like that, and they don't look like that. It didn't look anything like a black bear. Look at pictures of black bears, and then look at pictures of werewolves, and more specifically, the werewolves from The Howling. Now you tell me, do they look anything alike? I didn't think so. Even though the creature that chased me that day was more of a black color than it was a gray smoky color, it still again looked nothing that resembled a bear, especially in the face. In fact, I want to say it was even larger than a black bear. Either way, I still don't have the answers, and even now, talking about it can sometimes make me uncomfortable. But I know it's for the greater good, and I know that many people, if anybody listens to this, it will help them cope and maybe come out with their own story. This is something that I've kept to myself for a very long time, but I'm a fan of scary stories, and through the rabbit hole, stumbled upon your channel, which I then fell into the whole Dogman Encounters playlist you have, which has hours upon hours of these sightings of these creatures. Well, after listening to so many accounts, I feel that now's the right time to come forward with my sighting. I don't know if what I saw is exactly a Dogman, as described in every story that you have, but I believe that it was a Wolfman of some kind, because it closely resembled some of the descriptions that are in some of your stories. But first, I'll give you some appropriate background information on me. I go by Richie, and I'm about 41 years old, about to turn 42. I weld professionally for a company whose name I will keep anonymous for the sake of this being attached to them in any way, just in case this happens to go viral, because in the day of the internet, you really never know anymore. I'm a very serious individual, and I only believe what you can see and what is proven to be real. And what's more proof than seeing it with your own eyes, especially this sighting that I had. So, enough about me. Let me tell you exactly what I saw. At this time, it was about 9:30, maybe 9:20. It was already dark out, so it was earlier in the year. By the way, this was in 2010. So, I'm driving on the 78, south of Blythe, California. There's really no other cars on the road. I mean, there are, but they're far and few in between. I think there was one behind me, maybe about half a mile, but that's not really relevant or really important to the story. What is important is that the only other vehicle I saw at the time in the oncoming lane was a large semi. Now here's where things get crazy. So there's no other car in front of me, and if you know anything about the 78, is that you're surrounded by desert, since you're right near Mexico, and this is the part of California that is hotter than hot can get. On average, it's about 90 to 100 degrees. Maybe not all year round, but it seems like a lot of it. I remember that I was just driving casually. I think I even had the radio on low, just doing my thing, watching the road. It was dark out, but enough light from my headlights and the oncoming semi with its back reflectors that I could easily make out it was an oncoming semi. But then, as I'm going 60, or whatever the speed limit was, I see this semi-truck halt on its brake and come to a screeching halt. Then, as my headlights start to hit it, I see what I can only describe to you, appropriately, as a wolfman jumping up onto the hood of the semi and then onto the back trailer, and then jumping off the back, and then out into the desert. It nearly caused a semi to crash off the road and skid on its brakes, turning its trailer, nearly turning over entirely. I drove by slowly, my mouth agape, in total awe at what I just saw. The semi miraculously didn't crash. It was somehow able to re-straighten itself and continue driving straight like nothing ever happened, quickly regaining speed. Whatever this thing that I saw must have appeared out of the desert, jumped up onto the semi, and then onto the trailer, and then off into the darkness. Why? I have no idea. What was it? I have no idea. I have wondered that the rest of my drive, all the way down to Brawley. I wish I had more of a story for you than that, but that's basically it. And now that it's been almost 10 years since that encounter, I can remember it pretty well, just like it happened to me last week. There is no doubt at all in my mind that what I encountered that night was in fact a Dogman. Let me take you back. The year was 1989, and I and my girlfriend had just graduated high school. So, we were going to start college that coming fall. It was June, where everything is thick with overgrowth. Summer is just about to start, and things are really getting hot. We were in the pinnacle of spring, and it's one of my favorite times of year. But that's not the point of the story. We had some close family friends that had a nice little cabin out by a lake. This was in Colorado, at a location I'm going to keep undisclosed. Our plan was to go up there for the weekend, Friday night, Saturday night, and leave Sunday morning. I wasn't really big into hunting or fishing, so my plan was to have a nice romantic getaway with my girlfriend. We had both just turned 18, so we were legal adults, which means we could bring cigarettes and semi-party without being caught. My plan was we would spend a lot of time by the lake, swimming and just relaxing, maybe even reading and doing other stuff that couples do. You get the hint, especially being 18 years old. After all, my hormones were raging. So, we get up there, we get everything set up, and the cabin is already pretty well put together. Our family friends that owned it kept it very well clean and furnished. There were several rooms with several beds, and they really only ever visit it a handful of times a year. Well, looking back, maybe it was more a handful of times in the spring and summer, so it was pretty well kept up on, and not deserted and desolate like you would imagine a cabin to be. Everything goes great that first night, and we have our first night together, completely alone. 2 18-year-olds, totally by themselves in the middle of the woods, next to a beautiful large lake, in their own cabin, with nobody around. That first night, we got a great night of sleep. We slept like babies, and were only awakened by the sun shining in our faces, telling us it was time to get up. I remember we spent that day out by the lake, swimming and just doing our thing, eating all the good food that we had packed. About evening time is when things started to get a little weird. My girlfriend at the time kept asking me, "Are you sure nobody's around here? Are you sure we don't have any neighbors? Are you sure there's no other campers?" And I remember I kept asking her, "Why do you say that? What's going on?" She told me at the time she just couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like there was somebody in the woods watching us. I had to reassure at the time that that wasn't the case, and we were the only ones around here. Boy, at the time was I wrong. But I didn't feel the feelings that she was feeling. I didn't sense that there was somebody watching us. So, I simply ignored it and just tried to reassure her that everything was okay. Which it was, until that night, when we started to hear sounds coming from outside the cabin. We decided that we would spend right before bed, reading our books, and just cuddling together. I'll spare you the vulgarity, and just let you know that we had plenty of time where we had romance. So, we were cuddling afterwards, reading our books. I remember it was roughly probably after 8 or 9. I don't know exactly the time, but I can tell you, it was just about dark. I think the sun had just finished settling. That's when we began to hear noises outside the cabin. My first inkling was that there was possibly a large bear outside. At the time, and still, I'm not really familiar or know anything about the wildlife in Colorado, or this area that we were in, but I figured the only thing that could be that big that was making this noise was that of a bear. I tried to downplay it as much as possible to keep my girlfriend from panicking and freaking out. Besides, no bear is going to try to break into your cabin. It was probably just bumbling through the area and possibly smelt our food from earlier in the evening. No biggie. We had all of our trash inside. No food, nothing left outside for it to get into, or any reason to attract it into here. And then, everything got quiet. We had the window slightly cracked, so the sound of crickets and the forest, which is very much so alive during this time of year, was like a chorus, a very, very loud chorus, had all of a sudden faded out and turned into utter silence. I noticed it right away because it came accompanied with a very bad feeling in my gut. One that I can't describe, even to this day. It's just a feeling that something is wrong, and so I wanted to inspect and check it out. At this moment, I didn't hear the supposed bear anymore, so I thought that that wasn't even a thing, that this bear that had walked through had already gone off. And besides, the noise had ceased probably a few minutes after. So, I got up, went to the cabin front door and opened it, and listened. Everything was still quiet. I couldn't see anything in front of me because of how dark it was, and the stars in the sky only illuminated some of everything around me. That's when my eyes, which were just now adjusting to the darkness around me, could make out movement coming towards the cabin. I squinted, and my eyes began to adjust more and more to the dark surrounding me. This large black shape began approaching us more and more. That's when I started to panic, and I slammed the door and ran back to my girlfriend. I told her that we might have trouble with a bear coming. She started getting scared, but I calmed her down and told her that we really have no problems if it's a bear. I mean, a bear's not going to break into the cabin after all. That's when I walked back to the cabin door and tried to listen. That's when I started hearing heavy footsteps. Footsteps that were clearly 2 feet and not 4, like a regular animal that lives in the forest. At this moment, my mind and gut instantly knew something was more than wrong. This wasn't an animal like I thought. This was something else, and I should have known, judging by the large black shape. It didn't resemble a bear on all fours. I couldn't really tell you what it was because it was so dark out. It was just some large black shape. But now, after about 30 seconds if not more, and it's right outside the cabin, I could hear it walking around, on 2 legs, just like a person. I began to get scared, thinking that maybe it was some large man coming out to rob us, or kill us, or worse. As quietly and fast as I could, I ran back to the room where my girlfriend was, and she was already hiding in the corner, under the window, so she couldn't be seen. She had heard this thing too, and whatever it was pacing around the cabin, slowly. Our window was still open, cracked, I should say, and we started to hear it, making noise. It was like a low, raspy growling, kind of like a dog does, but it sounded like a dog that had smoked an entire pack of cigarettes every day for 20 years. It was so raspy and low. I can't even begin to describe to you how bad it sounded, but it was so deep that we could feel the vibrations through the wall. Kind of like how if you blast the bass into music and how it hits your chest. That's how it was. Not because of the sheer volume of the growl, but because how much bass and rasp there was to it. It continued, whatever it was at the time, to pace around the cabin and past our window, back all the way around to the front. Then we didn't hear anything, until just a few moments later, when whatever this thing was began violently rattling the door handle to the front of the cabin. Luckily, I had just locked it right as I ran to my girlfriend, not even thinking, kind of just a secondary safety measure, something that I do subconsciously, and I'm lucky that I did. Whatever this person was, thing was, I don't even know, was trying to get into our cabin. Once it began rattling the door handle, it began growling even louder, like an angry dog trying to break into the house. My girlfriend and I were petrified, frozen in fear, not knowing what to expect, Then, the door started slamming. Whatever this thing was, just like a person trying to break in, began slamming its body against the door. This went on for a good hour, or so it felt like, but it was probably only maybe 5 to 10 minutes. It seemed like a long time, violently trying to break the door down, shaking the door handle, banging all over the cabin, pacing around the cabin, growling, rumbling. We never exactly saw it up close, and thank goodness. I also don't know if whatever it was looking in the windows, because to be honest, me and my girlfriend stayed hidden, down in the corner of the room, never looking out the windows, never staying by the door. After a while, things got quiet, and even though the sounds outside remained silent, we didn't hear any more of the pacing, any more of the growling, any more of the rumbling of the door. The ominous presence that accompanied whatever this person was, or whatever this thing was now gone too, and only silence outside remained. I think we eventually fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, not hearing anything anymore. When this thing was around, you knew it, because the footsteps were very heavy. Imagine somebody wearing iron boots that weighed 100 pounds each, stomping around on the dirt. Every thud, you would hear it and feel it. It was the most terrifying experience I've had since, and this was almost 31 years ago. I can still remember my girlfriend waking me up the following morning, right after. It was just as sun was coming up, and we decided to not take any more chances and get out of there post-haste. I remember as we were leaving the cabin and just grabbed all of our stuff, we saw outside large canine footprints. I'm talking large, far bigger than the size of my hand. I have no idea if it was a wolf or a dog or what it was. My girlfriend is unsure too. It was some sort of beast that lives out in the woods. I was sure of it. We got out of there so fast that the car was in complete disarray, but we didn't care. We didn't want to spend another minute there. Later on, far after we got back, our family was asking us how was the trip and if we enjoyed ourselves. We wanted to play everything off as cool, because we simply knew that if we told them what had happened, we would have been the laughing stock of the family, and they wouldn't believe us. So, again, we played it off as everything was cool, but just decided to never go back. Now, if we jump forward in time a little bit, say by about 20 years, it was right around 2009, 2010, nearly 20 years, is when I started to learn about a thing called the Dogman, but only very loosely, and I learned they were very prominent in the Michigan-Wisconsin area. But I paid no attention to that, because I didn't make the correlation then. Then, fast forward again, maybe another 4 to 5 years to 2015, 2016, and encounters with these things started coming out in droves. That's when I was finally able to listen and make the correct correlation that what we saw that night, or what we experienced, what was trying to break in, and supposedly probably trying to eat us, was indeed a dogman. I don't think there's any other explanation for it. There is no rational reasoning of any animal that it could have been. Nothing walks around in the woods in Colorado on 2 legs. Nothing sounds as big as that. Nothing stomps around, and nothing, and I repeat, nothing has canine tracks and tries to violently break the door down. I don't believe in werewolves or monsters, but I do believe in creatures that we can't see. Anyway, that's my experience, and I hope it serves you well in sharing it. You have full permission to use it however you will.